Coming up next, one of the funniest stories that I've ever come across. A legendary singer was in the middle of an intimate moment with his then wife. Yeah, they were in the middle of doing it, right? Then they were interrupted by his neighbor. His neighbor also happened to be the legendary guitarist in his band. He was up late. He was a bit tipsy, the guitarist, and his wife had actually kicked him out. But he had a no-brainer song idea that he wanted to write then and there. This great riff. So he interrupted the couple's session, and they got a massive hit out of it, but the singer was in trouble with his wife. The story's coming up next in full detail on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. So for today's installment, we're honoring one of my favorite rock voices, one of my favorite bands, along with the most insanely talented guitarists of all time, in my opinion. By themselves, these two musicians were undeniably brilliant. But when you put them together in one of rock's most iconic bands, they were absolutely superhuman. The duo? Well, I'm talking about Eddie Van Halen and Sammy Hagar. This once-in-a-lifetime combo set the world on fire back in the day, from the mid-'80s into the early '90s, and you can still smell the smoke decades later. In addition to paying tribute to these two rock giants, we're also covering what has become something of kind of an underrated Van Halen song, even though it was a hit. Very popular back in its day with a hilarious story attached to it. Talking about Finish What You Started from 1988's OU 812.
Come on, baby, finish what you started.
For some reason, this one has fallen out of the public periphery, but it's the perfect illustration of these two incredible musicians clicking together with a very unique sound, and it's got a great groove to it. Let's get into it. Since their self-titled debut album scored a number 19 on the Billboard 278, Van Halen was on a steady march to the top of the U.S. albums chart. 1979's Van Halen 2 and 1980's Women and Children First, they both hit number 6. Then Fair Warning hit number 5 in 81, Diver Down number 3 in 82. Finally, 1984 reached number 2 in 84. The last one was held out of the top spot, ironically by Michael Jackson's Freight Train Thriller. I mean, Eddie collaborated with Michael Jackson on the album's single Beat It, writing and performing the guitar solo, so you should probably get partial credit there.
Their words are really clear, so beat it. Just beat it.
We've, of course, talked about what happened with Van Halen after 1984 many times, so no need to really go into detail there. But as the David Lee Roth era came to an end, the boys of Van Halen started searching for a new lead singer. We've talked about that as well. Enter former Montrose frontman and high-speeding solo artist, the Red Rocker, Mr. Sammy Hagar. Of course, Sammy became the new voice of Van Halen, laying down his guitar in favor of the almighty Axeman Eddie Van Halen. Together, the two created an incredible symbiotic relationship that powered the band through the remainder of the 80s and into the 90s. I've had the privilege of interviewing Sammy on multiple occasions. He's actually hosted me at his studio, and I've hosted him for a Professor Rock Live event. He's always been so gracious and forthcoming about his time with Van Halen, in particular his relationship with Eddie Van Halen. It's true the two would have their rough patches, but when I've talked with Sammy, he's been nothing but complimentary about his one-time bandmate. Sammy's saying they were always trying to one-up each other, but their relationship, it was never about ego. It was always about trying to impress and elevate each other, and man, when you listen to their output, you just can't argue with the results. Very inspired. Like Sammy sings in Dreams, their partnership just pushed him higher and higher. Speaking of Dreams, in 1986, Van Halen released their first Sammy-era album, 5150. After 1984, the band had only one place to go in their march to the top, to number 1, and they did get there. 5150 became Van Halen's first number 1 record in the US and kicked out 3 top 25 hits from there.
So tell me why can't this be love? All your dreams are strange. Love comes walking.
In terms of sales and Hot 100 singles, 1984 was still bigger, but I'd still argue it was a grand slam after parting ways with David Lee Roth. I mean, you never know if a new singer is going to work out. There's just no doubt, though, that Sammy was the perfect singer for Van Halen at that time. Following the success of 5150 and its accompanying tour, Van Halen wanted to keep their momentum going by working on material for their next album. However, Sammy still owed his former label Geffen a solo record, so marshalling Eddie to co-produce and play bass, Sammy cut I Never Said Goodbye in about 10 days. It was released in June of '87. The album climbed to number 14 in the U.S. Now, making the next Van Halen record would be take a lot more time. A very consuming process spanning between September of '87 and April of '88. Reassured by the success of 5150, though, the guys plowed ahead without a producer overseeing the record themselves. For most of its creation, the title of the album was supposed to be Bone, and Eddie was also partial to calling it rock and roll. He said, and I quote, "That's what it is. It ain't heavy metal, it's not hard rock, it's rock and roll." Ultimately, though, the tongue-in-cheek name OU812 was the title. Reportedly, Sammy saw the characters on the side of a delivery truck and adopted the name as a counterpunch to David Lee Roth's 1986 solo album, Eat 'Em and Smile. After the heavy synth 5150, OU812 took on a more natural production style. The record was musically wider ranging than 5150, and it showcased the band getting more comfortable with one another. The record was dedicated to the memory of Jan Van Halen. OU812 was released on May 24th of 1988, and it included 4 top 40 singles. There was Black and Blue, When It's Love, Feels So Good, and today's track, Finish What You Started. Two other tracks also scored airplay in the US and showed up on the mainstream rock charts, Mine All Mine and Cobble Wobble. So let's talk about Finish What You Started for a second here. The last song recorded for the album, this semi-acoustic slice of Americana, is like nothing the band had ever done before that, really. A loose country rock style track. In some ways it's reminiscent of John Mellencamp, and it's enhanced by some creative finger picking and a very playful arrangement. In fact, Finish What You Started is the only Van Halen song to feature Sammy Hagar on guitar, acoustic guitar. Said Sammy about it, "The only song I ever played on a Van Halen record was this song. I played rhythm guitar." The song worked remarkably well for being something so different, and it proved to be a refreshing change for the band, and it allowed Sammy to showcase a different side to his voice as well. I really dig the track. There's a really funny story behind how this one came together as well. Sammy's talked about it on multiple occasions, but I got this one straight from Sammy himself, and he added some details I hadn't heard before. Like I mentioned, I had the enormous privilege of hosting the Red Rocker on an installment of Professor of Rock Live, and we hope that series will come out soon in some way. We'll let you know about that. But in this session, he shared some entertaining details about how he and Eddie Van Halen wrote Finish What You Started. I'm going to tell you what he told me, but first, let me just set up the scene. So at the time that they composed it, Eddie and Sammy were both living in Malibu, and they were practically next-door neighbors. Actually, there was just one house in between them. So at the time, Sammy was still married to his first wife, Betsy, and Eddie was married to Valerie Bertinelli. So it was a pretty ideal scenario for the two friends and bandmates. You know, things were comfortable and, maybe a little too comfortable. I say that because it wasn't uncommon for Eddie to show up at Sammy's place unannounced, or even go between houses across their neighbor's yard. Said Sammy about it. "So I lived next door to Eddie Van Halen in Malibu when I joined the band. Bought a house there, just one house was between us. This guy's in the middle between us, and I could come out of my bedroom onto my deck and I could see Eddie's bedroom window. He'd pop it open and we'd be yelling, talking back and forth. The poor guy in the middle of us would be out there trying to have a business lunch or something. So I remember we'd just jump over this guy's little picket fence and run through his backyard, and so on and so forth. Like I said, maybe a little bit too comfortable." How would you like to be the neighbor between those guys? So late one night, I guess Eddie and Valerie were having a lover's quarrel. So Eddie started doing what Eddie did, writing music. Eddie was pretty excited what he had come up with at this point. So he hopped the fence. Maybe he went around front, I don't know, but for sure. But anyway, he went to Sammy's house and he started throwing pebbles at Sammy Hagar's window. I'll let Sammy pick it up from here. I'm going to quote him exactly. This is what he said. He said, "So one night, middle of the night, it's summer, it's beautiful, beautiful night. I hear Eddie out there. Sam!" I'm going, "Dude, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning." He said, "Come on." He's got a guitar around his neck, no shirt, cigarette hanging out of his mouth, bottle of tequila. And he just says, "Come on down. Come on, man. Valerie's pissed off at me." And I'm thinking, if I go, my wife's going to be pissed off at me. But I went on down. We always sat out on the porch. And with 2 acoustic guitars, I said, yeah, let's write a song with acoustic guitars. We'd never done that before. And it was so good, we wrote the song, boom, dead on the spot.
If you wanna see other guys.
That was just the kind of relationship that Sammy and Eddie had. You know, when inspiration struck, for one, the other was kind of there to back him up and take things to the next level. That's why these guys were so phenomenal together. Now, I should mention here that Sammy wasn't the only one who was awake in his bedroom. Turns out Eddie had interrupted something of an intimate moment. Hence the title of the song, Finish What You Started. This entire late night episode proved to be the perfect fodder for the lyrics for the song. Said Sammy about it, "I know it sounds kind of corny, but I just wrote the song about the lyrics that were pretty much the truth. You know, he caught me in the middle of something."
Come on, baby, finish what you started.
Now, no doubt, Sammy came back to a frosty reception when he finally made it back to bed. He said that by about 4 a.m, he was just laying there in bed going over the lyrics in his head, and it came to him. "Come on, baby, finish what you started. I'm incomplete."
I'm incomplete.
Before he knew it, Sammy was back out of bed, just writing it all down so he could get it. So in a very literal sense, Finish What You Started is the story of what happened that night. Eddie Van Halen interrupted him in the middle of, an intimate moment with his wife. He probably pissed his wife off, just like Eddie had pissed his wife off, but they got a #1 rock song out of it. And it's just, I love that story. I'm sure the neighbor was also awake for this as well. Finish What You Started, though, it's interesting because it was a big song for them, but it's kind of become something of a hidden gem. On YouTube and Spotify combined, it's like at 20 million streams. As far as pop culture media, it's virtually non-existent. Only one TV show has used it that I know of. It's a sitcom from 1990 that was called Sydney. Incidentally, it starred Eddie's then wife, Valerie Bertinelli, and also the late Matthew Perry. As far as cover versions go, though, Finish What You Started, it's been covered by Sammy Hagar in his various post-Van Halen projects like Sammy Hagar and the Circle and Sammy Hagar and the Wabos.
Come on, baby, finish what you started. I'm incomplete.
Also a couple of other versions. There's one by the Foo Fighters, and also John Mayer teamed up with the Red Rocker to do it on Sammy's show, Rock and Roll Road Trip.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding. Let's go. No, let's go play music. Yeah, right on.
And now you can get it on vinyl with this new Sammy Hagar era Van Halen box set. I just picked this up a couple of weeks ago. You got to get it with Christmas coming, especially.
Oh, baby, come on.
Finish What You Started. It's a bit of a classic Van Halen hidden gem. It was huge in its day, don't get me wrong. It was released in September '88. It peaked at number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. Fared even better on the rock charts. It went all the way to number 2. Might have been number 1. Finish What You Started was also a key track in helping OU812 go quadruple platinum. Made it the second straight number 1 Van Halen album with Sammy, proving that the success of 5150 and Hagar era Van Halen was no fluke. In fact, OU812 would be the second of 4 straight number 1 albums in the US for the revamped band.
Come on, baby, finish what you started.
Every single album that Van Halen and Sammy did together went to number 1. And if you put those 4 albums together with 1993's Live Right Here, Right Now, Sammy era Van Halen sold over 25 million albums around the world. Add to that 9 top 40 Hot 100 hits and 25 mainstream rock chart top 40 hits, including 9 number ones. Actually, I think they have the most number ones of any band in the rock era on the rock charts. Massive success. In fact, there wasn't a single Van Hagar record that didn't score at least 2 mainstream rock number 1 hits. Remember these?
Tell me why can't this be love? How do I know when it's wrong? The world turned upside down. Tell me what love can do.
Unfortunately, like David Lee Roth's tenure before, the Sammy Hagar-Eddie Van Halen partnership ultimately came to an end after their 4th studio album, Balance. It came out in 95. In fact, Eddie Van Halen told Guitar World in 1997, and I quote, "There had been a variety of conflicts brewing between manager Ray Daniels, Sammy, and the band since I quit drinking on October 2nd, 1994. Got so bad that I actually started drinking again." End of quote. And unfortunately, the tension, it didn't stop there. The subsequent tour doubled up the stress. It stretched from January to November of 95 and totaled 135 shows. I saw 2 shows on that tour. There were great shows, but Eddie actually dubbed it the ambulance tour. That's because he was fighting a hip injury and Alex was wearing a brace after rupturing 3 vertebrae in his neck. So it wasn't a fun time. When Van Halen finished the tour, the plan was to lay low, take some time off to heal up. However, it didn't last long because Eddie, being so driven and musically minded, he changed his mind and he wanted to keep moving forward. So Van Halen took on the project of writing 2 new songs for the 1996 blockbuster movie Twister, Humans Being and the ultimately unreleased ballad Between Us Two, which you can get on this box set. Said Sammy, "We weren't supposed to work the first half of 96. Eddie was supposed to get his hip surgery done. Al was supposed to get the vertebrae in his neck fixed. I was having a baby with my wife. So looking to compromise, Sammy asked to record his vocals in Hawaii, where he and his second wife, Kari, were. But that was vetoed by the Van Halen brothers. Disgruntled, Sammy left his wife to fly to California to work with the brothers at the 5150 studio. At this point, things were really starting to sour between Sammy and Eddie. There are definitely multiple sides to the story, and I'm not pointing any fingers here. It had just gotten to the point where these 2 incredible musicians could not see eye to eye anymore. The infighting continued on through 1996, and in June, actually June 26th, manager Ray Daniels announced that Van Halen was in the studio working with David Lee Roth, and that Hagar was no longer with the group. Roth's return, of course, that didn't stick, and Gary Cherone would front the band for 1998's Van Halen 3, though that wasn't a recipe for success either. We did get an all-too-brief Van Halen-Hagar reunion in the mid-2000s. In March 2004, the group announced that they were reuniting with Sammy for a new compilation release and a U.S. summer concert tour. The Best of Both Worlds, a double CD compilation featuring 3 new songs with Hagar, It's About Time, Up for Breakfast, and Learning to See, were coming out. Again, all that's on the box set. However, after the tour, band relations broke down once again and Hagar returned to his solo outfit, the Wabos. Fast forward to the tragic day of October 6, 2020, the day we lost the great Eddie Van Halen. And then in 2022, Sammy shared some details about an inspired dream that he had about Eddie. This dream, as it turned out, would lead to one final collaboration between the 2. Actually, I asked Sammy about this at the Professor of Rock Live event, and he told me about it. He said, "I dream about Eddie all the time. I don't know if it's real or not, but it sure feels real." We were in a room. I hadn't seen him for a long time. It was just like it would be. And I went, "Oh, Ed, how have you been?" This was the way it was supposed to be. I said, "What have you been doing?" He said, "Man, let's write a song. You got any ideas?" So we went over in a corner with 2 chairs. He had a guitar and he played me a riff and he had a chord change and I started singing a melody to it. I started singing something to it and I realized Ed was passed and then I woke up. So Sammy said that as he woke up, he still remembered the song. So he quickly sang it into his phone and then he went back to sleep. The next morning, he got out of bed and he started writing the song from his dream. It didn't have any words yet, and he didn't know what he should write about. So he decided, much like Finish What You Started decades earlier, to just write exactly what happened. Leave us a comment about Van Halen and Finish What You Started. What are your memories of this song? It's such a great song, a little hidden gem there. What do you think about this collaboration? It seems like we're getting these really cool songs with the Beatles coming out. It'd be cool to hear this song that he and Eddie wrote in a dream. Let's have a great discussion about Sammy and Eddie. If you want to be a part of our community, make sure to subscribe below. We would love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.